Well, tonight I want to share with you one of my passions, and that's knowledge about Pythagoras. Pythagoras has largely influenced just about every Western mystery tradition. And as was pointed out, Pythagoras also has a lot of Eastern influences himself. Right. As we were told, the name of the lecture for this evening is Number, Cosmos and Harmonia. Right. I picked this little saying to actually set the theme for this evening's talk. And the ancients, who were superior to us and dwelt nearer to the gods, have handed down a tradition that all things that are said to exist consist of one and in many, and contain in themselves the connate principles of limit and unlimitedness. And Pythagoras really based his mathematics and his philosophy on these teachings, on this concept. When we think about Pythagoras, we generally just think of his theorem of the right-angled triangle, which they forced on us as children in high school and primary school until we hated it. To Pythagoras, that little theorem was the basis of the architecture of the universe, and it was all based on ratios, or the relationship of one thing to another. Right? As it says in the middle there, 3 is to 4 is to 5. If you forget everything we learned about the right-angled triangle and all the difficult stuff they taught us at school, and just remember 3 is to 4 is to 5. Pythagoras loved ratios, and we'll go into how he explains these ratios are intrinsic to everything around us. Pythagoras actually began his life in Turkey. His family actually moved to Greece because it was better for business there. But Pythagoras ended up being a gifted and talented student, so his parents, being wealthy, actually gave him a lot of money to pursue his studies. He went from Greece, after he learned everything he could from the teachers there, over to Egypt. And when he had studied architecture, astronomy, mathematics, science, chemistry, under the tutelage of the Egyptians, and had soaked up all the knowledge that they could give him, he started to ask them where their knowledge came from. Right? And Pythagoras actually made a journey to the seat of Hindus, that's right, to where modern-day Tibet is, and he spent some years studying over there. We know that Pythagoras left Greece for a period of 20 years to further his studies around the world. When Pythagoras actually came back to Greece, not many people know this, he had all this knowledge and he just wanted to teach, and nobody would listen to him, not one. Couldn't get anybody, couldn't get any students. In the place of the world that was famous for its mystery schools and its teachers, he couldn't get a start as a teacher. So what he did was he went down to the slave market and he bought a slave. And he actually said that slave's main job was to learn. And every day the slave learnt one lesson from Pythagoras, included in his daily chores. Eventually, Pythagoras said, "Okay, I think I've taught you enough." And the slave said, "Okay, well, I'm going to pay you now to teach me, because the stuff that I'm learning from you is so valuable, it will gain me my freedom." And it did. Pythagoras actually ended up granting that slave his freedom, and he became his first teacher in his mystery school. But when we think about the images of slavery that are pushed at us through Hollywood today, it's very different to how slavery existed back then. Slavery back then was very much like employment today. You actually went in and checked in with your boss. You performed a certain amount of hours of work. You were able to earn your own money. Right? Your boss would often give you money to invest on his behalf in different businesses and things like that. So this slave of Pythagoras's ended up making so much money from what Pythagoras had taught him as part of his lessons that he ended up being able to pay Pythagoras for his lessons. People began to hear about that, and then they started sending their children, their young sons, their young daughters to Pythagoras to be taught. Well, when he came back from Greece, from his travels abroad at 40 years of age, he actually set up mystery schools. He set up one in Greece. He became politically active in Greece. They got very nervous there. So he left Greece because of tyrants, and he moved to Crotona in Italy. And in Crotona in Italy, again, he experienced huge persecution of the knowledge that he brought back. government would be best if it could actually be advised by somebody who wouldn't take bribes, right? And people from his school were actually taught to be of very, very high principles. So he actually recommended several students from his school to be set above the government as an advisory body, but separate. The governments were terrified by this because they would lose their income from their bribes. So they went and they burnt the school, they burnt all the books that Pythagoras had written. We have no written records written by Pythagoras himself these days. Right? And they went about setting out a whole lot of propaganda against his teachings. The one that has come down to us today is the fear of the pentagram, which was the symbol you had to draw, right, in order to gain entrance to his mystery school. So we'll talk in depth about that. But in this book, if you ever get a chance to get hold of this book, if you like a little bit of deep reading, but it's set out very plain English. It goes into Pythagoras' life in depth. It's an anthology of people who've written about his life, his teachings. It's probably the best one you can get. It's written by a gentleman called Guthrie. He wrote it about 1919, 1920, translated most of it from the Greek and compiled together. And in that it says, if Western civilization exists as a series of footnotes to Plato, then Plato exists as footnotes to Pythagoras. But most of what we understand now in our Western culture as fields of study come from what Pythagoras set up in that original school. And what were these valuable lessons that Pythagoras had to teach? These are some of the topics that were taught in the mystery school. Pythagoras didn't just teach mathematics. He was the first one to actually break down fields of study, right, into different categories. And the categories that were studied there were mathematics, obviously, science, astronomy. Our theory of music as we know it today in the West comes from Pythagoras. Right? We also, his main goddess that he worshipped was Hygiena. Right? So a lot of our Western medicine techniques actually come from what was actually originally taught in his schools. Health, politics, and egalitarianism. So he was, everybody understands here what egalitarianism is. That all men are created equal, all women are created equal. Women were admitted equally into his mystery school. In fact, Pythagoras' wife was one of his students. Pythagoras didn't get married until he was 70 years of age. So a lot of his teachings that he actually taught early in his life come across as being very male chauvinistic, as you would imagine a dyed-in-the-wool bachelor to teach about, the ideas about marriage and women's place in society. But he actually married one of his students. She was a very young, I think she was about 18 when she actually persuaded him. She badgered him to the point where she used to go around and tell him how cruel he was, that he would not let people love him. Right? And it was very reminiscent of the stories of Shakti winning Shiva's love. Here we have this old ascetic who's, he thinks he can't love, and here it comes a motivating force that teaches him how to love. And what we know about Pythagoras' teachings after that point are very soft. Love actually softened his teaching. When you entered his mystery school, it was tough. For the first year, you weren't allowed to speak to anybody. Right? He said that all of his students coming in had to accept the fact that they knew nothing, and they had nothing worthy to say to anybody. So you weren't allowed to speak to anybody. Pythagoras was also the first Westerner to be called a philosopher. He actually called himself a philosopher. Philo meaning love of learning, or the principle of love of learning. Pythagoras' main teaching, the reason why he's so known for mathematics, was that he taught that numbers were alive, that nature around us could be represented by numbers. When we think of numbers today, we think of quantitative values, that 1 is 1 of something, 2 is 2 of something. Well, to Pythagoras, each of these monads, right, which was the general name for each of them, the first 10 digits, actually was a personality within nature. And once you understood these personalities, they could relate to you. His idea of mathematics was that when you actually have a mathematical problem, the numbers want you to solve the problem And all of his teachings about life was like that. If there is a problem in life, it wants you to find the answer. It wants you to find the solution. So what we have here, now this is a little bit hard to read in this light, but the monad, right, is, thank you, right, monad, or one, right, solitary by itself. It was male-female, right, it was neither male nor female. He goes through a list of characteristics of its personality, but he said that it was true happiness, the undivided soul, before it was split apart. And if we know about Plato's story of the beginning of love, he actually talks about creatures splitting in half. Well, this is the creature before it's split in half, as a unified whole being. He said that the god that represented this was Zeus. He said it was to do with memory, right, because memory was a unification of all things. And he also said it was the first principle, the Proteus, right, the beginning of everything is pattern, the original paradigm, right, or the first darkness, right. If you ever read any of the Italian Strega philosophies, the old legends of Strega, they speak about the first principle being darkness, right. And you know, when you look in the Bible, Genesis 1:1, there was darkness, and then God created light. Then there became two, the dyad, right. And Pythagoras considered all even numbers to be feminine. Growth, birth, right, obviously because it's split suddenly into two things instead of one, right. He equated it with the goddess Isis, and Rhea, right, the wife of Cronus. Selene was also represented by the dyad. He said it was nature, matter, and obstinacy. In other words, you know, being able to argue, being able to actually have debate. Right? You need two opposing sides. The first male principle we have is the triad, right? Harmonia, right? When you actually have, today when we actually have people performing harmonies, they usually do two-part harmony. We actually went and saw the Russian Balalaika Orchestra a couple of days ago, and the Russians all do three-part harmonies. It's absolutely beautiful when you have a three-part harmony. You can actually start to see the ratio. And again, we go back to Pythagoras' 3:4:5, the ratio, right? The harmony of things. He said that it is a peaceful representation. Number 3. He related it to the goddess HEXAD. He said it shows the beginning of purpose, friendship, the mean between the two. So in other words, it's a very balanced number. Now, even though Pythagoras wrote a lot about the tetroidal shapes, the four-sided shapes, he actually didn't write much about the tetrad, right, as a monad, because he said it was the most unstable shape, right? It was not liked by nature. You don't find many perfectly square things in nature. He said, and therefore, and it would have come from his study of the I Ching, he equated it with death. The PENTAD, right? Drawing of the pentagram was actually the first requirement. You actually had to learn that before you could gain admission into Pythagoras' mystery school. It's amazing how much fear society has put into these shapes. I love taking fear away from things, right? And that hopefully today, if you leave here with a little less fear, I've done something really good. But at school, you would have learned how to draw that shape with a circle around it without lifting your pen from the piece of paper. But these days, Hollywood likes to portray that as a symbol to be afraid of, right? Whereas to Pythagoras, it was the most important shape, right? Now, also, all of these shapes that you see at the top here, the Pythagorean monads, were a two-dimensional representation only, right? That you could be easily drawn on paper. He used to teach about three-dimensional, four-dimensional, and other dimensional objects as well. Right? But we're going to spend a bit of time explaining why Pythagoras thought this was the most important shape. I mean, as you can see on the board there, it was the symbol of androgyny. It was basically a male number, but he felt that it was the actual number of marriage. He didn't consider the monad to be either male or female. It was the prime. Right? It had an individually distinct personality all by itself. So we actually have the first female and the first male monad united in the pentad. Now we're going to go all the way up to the decad. You'll see that in the decad, again, he represents that. He feels that the decad is represented by Zeus. So we have Zeus as the monad and Zeus as the decad. In other words, you've gone full cycle and you've stepped up to the next level. The HEXAD, right, or the Star of David. I'll show you tonight with this how Pythagoras actually used this shape so people could identify the visual landscape around them. That was the whole point of using these to represent numbers. Today our numbers are actually something that's quite frightening to us. You know, we're taught to be frightened of mathematics at school. Whereas Pythagoras would say, look around you, it's a visual landscape. Do you see the shape? Do you see this number? Where do you see it reflected in nature? What is the significance of it in nature? Like you'll see the pentad when you cut open an apple. It's in the middle of the apple, right? It's in the middle of those flowers. Right? So to Pythagoras, it was the symbol of nature reproducing itself. The hexad is actually a symbol of nature dividing itself. And I'll show you that with little divisions, and we'll do a bit later on. He related it to the ocean and the goddess Amphrite. He said it's a threefold healing, a perfection, a panacea. It's far shooting, and that was the name of Apollo. He called this one the form of forms in two measures. The heptad, right? Pythagoras actually had two favourite numbers, if we can say it that way. The heptad and the pentad, right, or 5 and 7. And Pythagoras loved looking at the relationship between one thing and another. And he said that it was a magical, mystical relationship between 5 and 7. The heptad is the virgin sister. He related it to Athena, and even though it's 7-pointed, right, and should be, you know, by his generalisation of rules, it should be a masculine because it's an odd number. He actually gives it like the analytical female, like the female that goes beyond her sex for her intellect. Right? The Vestal versions were also related to this in a later time in history. The octad, right, was the symbol of the mother. Right? He felt the octad was the shape of the pregnant woman, right? The small on top of the large. Right? It was a symbol of birth, of growth, of money, of prosperity. The Ennead, it's no wonder that he called his number 9 the Ennead, which was the word for the Egyptian pantheon of 9 gods. He gave that a masculine quality as well. Brother, consort, symbol for Helios, of one-mindedness. So one-mindedness means a group coming together for one purpose. Crossing or passage, right? So in other words, it's the last single-digit number before we get to the decad and go up to the next level. I'm sorry if we're moving a little fast tonight, but we started a little bit late and we've got to stay on time. So each one of those is a field of study by itself. I just want to give you a general overview. Now, Pythagoras, you think, why in I talk about Pythagoras am I bringing a picture up of an alto shaman? Well, Pythagoras actually had a friend called Abals. If you have a look at the writings by Iamblichus and Porphyry, they speak quite a bit about Abals. And he was one of the few people that Pythagoras considered an equal. And he spoke about him in glowing terms when he knew Abals was in Greece. He said, this is a man I can teach nothing to, for they have taught me. And that was a little hint, a little glimpse into the fact that Pythagoras had actually been taught by some of these Alpha Himalayan shamans. Now, when we have a look at where the Alpha Himalayan philosophy was, around the time of Pythagoras. You can see it actually extended quite a long way. We think about Altai Himalayas today as just being in the Himalayan region, sort of stretching across to Siberia. But it went all the way up, right, to the Icelandic countries. And then from there it was a short walk across the frozen areas over into North America. So we have the American Indians having a lot of these Altai traditions. And in fact, when you have a look at the North American Indians, you can see that they've carried this Asian gene across into not only North America, but down into South America. And I put a little dot over there because I was speaking with an Aboriginal Kadaitcha just recently, and probably about 6 months ago as well. And he feels that his traditions are so similar to the Tibetan shaman traditions that there is some correlation there. The tradition of the Altai Himalayas is sort of limited to that area today. But what were the teachings of these Altai Himalayas? If we go back and have a look at what they actually used to teach, it was a very complex philosophy, very similar to what Pythagoras taught in his mystery school. This is a symbol of the Tibetan calendar. Have you seen this before? In the middle of the Tibetan calendar, we actually have a magic square. We have 5, right, the PENTAD in the middle of the magic square there. And it's a magic square of 3 by 3. A magic square is a set of numbers arranged in a table so that they add up to the same number, vertically, horizontally, and diagonally. Right? And they get bigger. You know, we have 3 by 3, 4 by 4, 5 by 5 magic squares. And then we have the 8 trigrams around the outside of the I Ching. Right? And again, Pythagoras, one of his favourite ratios was the ratio of 5:8, which is the phi ratio. And then around the outside here, we have the 12 symbols of the Asian zodiac. So we sort of lose the phi ratio when we look at 12. 12 is a very important number. But both in the Asian astrology and also in the Celtic astrology, they have a hidden zodiac symbol. They have 13th. And 8 is the 13, again, gives us the phi ratio, the number of creation. So this is the symbol of their learning. As you can see, you know, they're not just the ignorant savages that are portrayed as by Hollywood today. They actually had to come up with this calendar. They had to have a very deep knowledge, right, of astronomy to be able to come up with that zodiac. The I Ching was divination, mathematics, art, science, philosophy, chronology. A lot of the Tibetan shamans' principles are based on chronology, and therefore the calendar. The story of how they actually got that magic square in the middle of their calendar was because they found the magic square, the Lo Shu, here. Well, Lo Shu was an emperor, and he was playing in the river one day, and he turned a tortoise over, right? And on the ventrals of the tortoise, he actually found these symbols that all added up to the same number. Right? And then the tortoise, being a very, very old and wise tortoise, gave him a lot of teaching about the cosmology and the chronology of the world. And as you can see there's the tortoise's face. Right? And that's supposed to be his underbelly. Alright, now, they also had a very, very complex set of correlations, right? So if Pythagoras did study with them, we can see his fascination for ratios because they just love to relate things to one another over there. Now, in the West, we have a set of magic squares that get bigger and bigger and bigger. In the East, they have a set of magic squares that start, again, with the Lo Shu, and then they increase all the digits by just one number, right? But then that makes the sum of the digits in the next square increase by 3, right? So each of these magic squares, you can see the sum underneath, then relate to different days of the week. They relate to different Tibetan deities. They relate to different directions, colours, metals, harmonic sounds, right, which are vowel sounds. And these vowel sounds are common. No matter what language you speak, we all have common vowel sounds. The Egyptians related these sort of correlations to what they called the Song of the Sun. In the morning, they used to have a ritual when the sun was rising on the horizon, on the horizon. Each degree it would go through, they would sing it a different vowel sound. And their vowels would be do, re, mi, fa, sol. And we continue that to today. Right? So because of Pythagoras' musical theory, that's been preserved for us. And they correspond to our musical notes. So, a lot of people say to me, when I have the correspondence of sevens table up there, why haven't you got the 7 chakras up there? Well, because in Asian nations, they don't actually have the 7 chakras. In India, under the Hindu system, under the Vedas, they actually have the seven chakra system, and they also have lots of other chakras as well. But that actually, through China, they actually have what they call 5 areas of manifestation in the body. They're related to 5 main areas. And a few of you may have studied the tattvas, right, which are areas of correspondence to those 5 areas within the body. Again, they're related to seed, sounds, elements, and areas of manifestation. Now, our good friend John D, who gets poo-pooed a lot, actually left us this interesting little symbol called the sigil and diamet. And in that, we can see that he's directly corresponded the 5 to the 7. Here again. Right, the HEPTAD to the PENTAD. When my friend was here, Jane, and he gave a lecture, he showed how we could divide 5 into 7 very quickly. 5 sevenths as a decimal is, and he gave me that number just off the top of his head. Do you want to show them how you did that? Because that fascinated me.
Yeah, quickly.
Yeah. It's also, as Jane told me, it's a recurring number. It's a circular number. Actually, I'll just let you explain. You do that so much better than I will.
I'll just be quick. In Vedic mathematics, we need to create a visual landscape. We need to be able to look at the fraction 5 sevenths and see it as a picture. But it doesn't work unless we have 9 in the base here. So the magic of Vedic mathematics is to see everything as with the numerator denominator must have a 9 down here. So if I multiply top and bottom by 7 on 7, which doesn't actually change it, I end up with, but basically to solve the problem, we can't do 5 sevenths like that. We have to visualize what 1 seventh is. So 1 seventh, we multiply the top and bottom by 7 on 7. When I do this, I can do 5 sevenths. So the answer will be, I can say, what's 7 on 49? So I can look at that now and see a picture, whereas before I couldn't. So it tells me that the top and the bottom is 6, 1 from 7 is 6. So I'm using my right brain here. I'm visualizing that there's a 6-digit answer. The last digit is going to be a 7 here. And I'm going to multiply this last digit by 1 more than this digit. I'm sort of jumping the gun here because I haven't explained the sutras that explain it. But I would multiply this by 5, 1 more than 4. So say 5 sevens are 35, carry the 3. 5 5 is 25 and 3 is 28. I can keep multiplying by 5 and I've got my answer. But because I understand Vedic maths, I take the complements of 9. I say 7 from 2, 7 from 9 is 2, 5 from 9 is 4, 8 from 9 is 1. So very quickly,
Didn't even take that long for it to do it. You just looked at it.
In my head, I can do it like in 10 seconds, but to explain it, I can say, yeah, well, 1 7 is 0.142857, which you can only do basically on a calculator. But then she wants to know, well, what's 5 sevenths? So I need to create another picture. I can plot those 6 decimals. 142,857 is 6 recurring decimals that go to infinity. So I want to look at the picture. So I say, well, that's 142,857. Then I can look at that and say, well, 2 sevenths must be this is 1 7, so we've done this one, but 2 sevenths would be 0.2 0.285714. So 5 sevens would be, that's 2 sevens, 3 sevens, 4 sevens. So 5 sevens starting from this wheel. So 5 sevens would equal 0.714285.
This little visual landscape, again, helps us with recurring decimal points. Now, we're talking about a system here. I can see a few confused faces, but we're talking about a system here that was used 500 years before Christ, 2,500 years ago. And before that, it was used for thousands of years by the Tibetan shamans, right, to do advanced mathematic calculations that today we need these little electronic toys to do. Whereas by relating things around us to a visual landscape, we can do these in our head very quickly. So what we're doing is we're going to shift maths from the realm of just being numbers without personality to art and personality. And John Dee did that very much with his work as well. Now, as we said before, the personality of number 4 is considered to be something that slows things down. If you go to the East, they don't like to build rooms with corners traditionally. The old yurts are always built in a circular fashion. So, Feng Shui says that there's no energy caught in the corners. And if you can have a look here at these wonderful tents, I don't know if you can see them very clearly up the back there, but they're actually a dodecahedral shape, right? They're a very round shape. There's the Western tents. This is actually Annapurna in the background, right? And that's called the Austrian Plain. Right? A lot of Austrians go there and camp before they go climb the mountains. You can't actually climb on Annapurna because it's considered a sacred mountain, so now it's protected. But their philosophy is that we live between the circle of earth and sky. So why put ourselves in boxes? Why live in corners? Right? So you can see this is reflected back to Pythagoras' teachings again. And there again, we're showing this little, not close-up as far as I could without distorting the picture too much of the dodecahedral shape. By altering the colours, you actually got a good idea of how it was constructed. Now, the dodecahedron is a multi-dimensional form. Now, we're going to jump from talking about two-dimensional objects for a little minute to talking about three-dimensional objects, because we're going to talk about three-dimensional forms of this. Right? That's just two-dimensional spot, length and breadth. Right? But if you actually turn that into a three-dimensional image, you get something like that. That's called a stellated icosahedron. Right? But if you joined all of these points together and filled in the gaps, you go back to a dodecahedron. Right, we go back to that shape. So what's interesting about that shape is, right, so that, right, is your icosahedron or your pentagonal, your three-dimensional pentagonal shape. And then by filling in that shape, turning it into the pentagonal shape in 3 dimensions, right, and then filling in those surfaces, we actually get the dodecahedron. So it actually is the ratio again between 5:7. See, it's a multi-dimensional form of a cube. Now you rotate 5 cubes through 32 degrees and you'll get your dodecahedron. It has 12 faces, they're all pentagonal, and 20 vertices. And I just showed you it can be the three-dimensional view of the pentagram. But it goes 10, 7. Right, the 20 vertices, right? You halve that, you get 10. So, and then you go back to 7. You go back to the, I just did it the wrong way around. The 20 vertices are the dodecahedral shape, directly pentagonal, directly from that. Now, a look here, what we've got here is three of these three-dimensional shapes nested one on top of the other. Each one of these is reduced by the phi ratio. And if you put them on top of one another, you can see the shape that is thrown, the shadow that's thrown on the side there. And a lot of us are very familiar with that shape from the Shé D'Montford, again showing this visual landscape that we live in. They're not just images that people have picked for no particular reason. They actually have mathematical resonance, and this mathematical resonance has a personality, has a divinity that wants to help us solve the problems in our lives. So, by examining the pentagram a little bit more closely, we can see that it has a fractal nature. Fractal means that it can reproduce itself smaller or larger. So if you have the pentagram, you can draw another pentagram inside itself like that. The only geometric shape that can actually reproduce itself like that in nature. But when it reduces itself, it actually reduces itself by the same ratio all the time, which is the phi ratio. You've heard me mention that a few times now. Now the phi ratio, we will discuss in just a minute, is 1:0.618, which is reflected along the top of that low shoe square. We'll go back to that too. But fractally, along its arms, infinitely, or inside the pentagon, and you can see within there pentagon, pentagram, out right along the arms. In this one, down to the tiniest pentagram in the middle, but you can start to see other geometric landscapes within that. You can see the serpent spiral or the labyrinth weaving its way through there. The longer you look at it, the more you can find in that visual landscape. So the pentagram becomes a map for us of the phi ratio. If you have a look at this, the actual proportions along here are actually related to each other within this phi ratio again. This 1:618. The phi ratio produces the Fibonacci sequence, right? And that was, we were talking about before in the middle of the low shoe calendar. 5, 8, 13. So how do we get these numbers? Simply by adding the number to the number in front of it. So 2 and 1 is 3, 2 and 3 is 5, 5 and 3 is 8. Right? This is the mathematics of creation. It's the rate at which leaves grow on trees in nature. Right? You'll start with one leaf, right? Then you'll have another leaf. Then all of a sudden you'll have 2 leaves. Then all of a sudden you'll have 3, 5, rather than, it's the rate at which the nautilus shell increases itself within this ratio. Most mollusks will enlarge themselves by that amount. And opposing spirals from things like the pine cone. Can I just get, also see the spy spiral on things like pineapples. Right. So what we're actually seeing within this pentagram shape is a map of creation. Right. Nature is telling us what its mathematics is to reproducing itself. Cells within the human body, when we're in embryo, we've got the impression that cells just double all the time. They don't. They reach a certain point where they start to increase by the phi ratio. Now, if you have a look at a pine cone, and count the number of the segments in one direction, and then count the counter-rotating field in the other direction, you'll see that the difference between the two is always in that Fibonacci sequence. Right? It'll be that phi ratio to each other. Right. I love this shape, right, which is a ram's horn. It's not only the two-dimensional spiral, it shows you how it actually reaches out into nature in a three-dimensional form. When we think of the phi spiral, we probably would have seen this image when we were at school of the golden mean or the golden square, right, the golden rectangle, where they divide it up and flip that piece over and then make a smaller rectangle, and then by going into the middle we produce this perfect spiral that keeps protruding out. If you have two spirals together, it forms that shape. We're looking at those spirals. Right, this spiral, right, in a very flat, two-dimensional way. But as you can see, if you actually project it out into 3 dimensions, that's also the path the blood flows through your heart. It goes in through the vortices and out through the ventricles. But you can actually use the pentagrams, decreasing and increasing, to produce the same spiral in 1 and 2 dimensions. So, I don't know why we weren't shown this at school. This is much more fun. So you can see the spiral between the 3 pentagrams there. Right, this is 10 spirals out of 5 arms each way. It gives us the flower of life. The pentagram is in everything. The phi ratio is in everything around us. This is why Pythagoras thought it was so important. Right? We can see that the difference there is the phi ratio. If that is 1, that is 1.618 across there. Right? The proportions are within the human body. The perfect human face, the Jacqueline Smith. You remember the original Charlie's Angel, Jacqueline Smith? She was supposed to have a perfectly proportioned face according to the phi ratio. I think somebody said that John Cleese has just done a documentary on the proportions within the human face and the phi ratio. But your body is also proportioned up. You don't actually bend in the middle when you bend over. You actually bend from the ground to your head at the proportion of 1 is to 0.618. That's where you bend. Right? The arm bends, not in the middle, to give you the maximum leverage, and also the beauty of the arm, the beauty of your own proportions of the human body. It bends. If that is 1 there, then that is 1.618 all the way up your arm. Or if that is 1, that's 0.618 of the distance. So it's in everything, it's in creation all around us. It's why Pythagoras loved his fractality, he loved his ratios. The more he looked at nature, the more he could see it speaking this language to him. It wanted to tell him the secrets. This is a little diagram of fractality here, showing that if we have a square and divide it, we get the shape of trees, of lungs, the bronchiole in the lungs, but also broccoli looks like that. These are fractal shapes. Fractality is the nature of the universe. It was reflected in old Egyptian teachings, as above, so below. When people perform rituals and they stand in a pentagram, what they're actually asking is for the universe to move according to the ritual, or for them to move according to the universe. They're reflecting this fractality within nature. Newton's theories, Einstein's theories reflect that. Newton came up with some great ideas after that apple hit him on the head. But one of his theories was if you drop an apple towards the ground, not only does gravity push it, attract it to the ground, but the earth also moves towards the apple. But because the earth is so big, you don't notice how much it moves. Right? Attraction works in both ways. As above, so below. We can see the small thing moving more than what we can see the big thing moving. This is just a picture I got off the internet to illustrate fractality. Fractality is not holographic because it's not an exact representation of what you're looking at, right? But you get the patterns over and over again, and I think it's very it's going unnoticed that a lot of these crop circles are actually fractal patterns, right, that they actually reproduce themselves. But like these spirals, again, will spin, but sometimes they'll spin in the opposite direction. You can see fractal patterns if you drop ink into water, right, or a drop of vinegar into milk. You'll see fractals emerge. Now, because of these ratios, relating one thing to another, Pythagoras came up with these musical theories. And we've got a few musicians in the audience tonight. So What he called an octave was actually 7 notes, right, with the 8th being the next octave, right? So an octave is actually a bit of a misnomer. But we get our musical tones by the relationship between these notes. And this is actually a little bit misleading because it's got 8 notes there instead of 7. Right, but if you actually count on your fingers the distance between 6 and 12, right, including, you get 7. Right? So a whole octave is 7 notes. Right? But then he showed the relationship, how these sound when you have these musical note values. Right? We get our fifths and our fourths in the distances, the relationship between these numbers. So how did he come up with these? I'll come back to that one. Actually, he devised an instrument called the monochord. And with the monochord, it's just got 1 string, and he divided it proportionally along. So if you've got a string like this, one string like that, and you divide it in, right, that will form a wave when it produces music, right, a big slow wave. Right? If you divide it in half, the wave is faster and the music is higher. So what he decided to do was call that 1 string on the monochord is the octave. You divide it in half, right, you get a half an octave. Right? And so he continued to divide it, right, to produce his ratios. So, very quickly, this is an Ashley brilliant cartoon that I love. The difference between science and magic is that magicians usually know what they're doing. Right. So what we're doing now is actually, our scientists are on a path of rediscovery. There is so much that they still don't know. We like to think that we are the most advanced that we've ever been in our society at the moment. But we have a look back. You know, I studied architecture for 2 years. They still don't know how they moved the bricks for the pyramids, those huge blocks. They have no idea how they built it, how they got it so accurate. There's so much that we don't know. I do run courses. I'm starting up my mystery school again. There is so much to be learned by looking back at the mysteries of the ancients, studying them in depth. In the mystery school, we have people like Jane come and lecture, and we have some wonderful lecturers from in Sydney that are joining forces with us this year. So with the mathematical section, you'll learn things like we've brushed over today. You'll understand fractality. You'll be able to use it within ritual to gain what you want out of life. You'll be able to use it within your living space, to make your life more harmonious. Pentagrams, exercises for going trans-dimensional. Jane does a wonderful meditation where you actually breathe out and visualize that you're expanding by the phi ratio with each out-breath. And it is amazing how quickly you can be on the other side of the universe with that meditation. Recognizing and working with these divine personalities in number and how they can assist you. So, other things we teach in the mystery school, prana breath techniques, other breathing techniques, tumo, how to generate energy within your body, move it around, how you can use that for heating, how you can use it to cheer somebody up you're walking past on the street. Samadhi techniques. Samadhi is what people call gifted psychic abilities, levitation, things like that. We do some quite advanced techniques with those sorts of things. Meeting your holy guardian angel or your genie, your genius. Einstein was asked how he came up with all of his theories, and Einstein said, I talk to my genius, which is the Jewish word for genie. Tantric techniques, we also explode myths about words like tantra. There are so many different tantras. It's not just sexual. Tantric techniques are things that have been in India for years and years and years. So we go back and we have a look at those as well. We actually go to more advanced levels than that. There are basic courses that we do in the first 2 years. Some of the more advanced things is actually summing up these personalities within nature and asking them to cooperate with you to gain what you need, and also soul retrieval, using these abilities to help heal other people as well. So I'll leave my contact details there. I was actually going to have some brochures printed up for people if they were interested in the mystery school. There was a lot of interest last time I spoke to people here. I actually did a lecture on the Gold Coast before September 11, telling people what's going to happen in September 11 and how to avoid it. We actually didn't have that tape for ages. My partner in the video business in Queensland actually rang me up about 5 months ago and said, here's the tape, would you like to do something with it? So if you're interested in that, it's actually called Avoiding Armageddon. It's about being in the right place at the right time rather than in the wrong place at the wrong time, and knowing within yourself when things like September 11 are going to happen. It's not hard. Once you start seeing this visual landscape, to actually see the universal billboards all around you that are trying to teach you. But I hope I've been able to share a few little things with you today and hopefully explode a couple of fears. Thank you very much.
We'd like to take some questions.
Oh yeah, if people have some questions, sure.
Yes. Joyce has one, yes. It seems to me that what you're saying is just the building blocks of creation and different, it's a pattern that goes right through the universe, but the building blocks of a tree or a human being is infinite, and it goes on dividing and multiplying in and out, sort of. Seems, if I've grasped it right, that's what it's saying to me.
If you
want to take one?
sorry, sure.
You're absolutely right. What you're looking at here is a map of the universe. It's easy to get the middle, but it's also a map of an atom.
Yes.
Right? So if you did that and put a dot in the middle, you're looking at an atom. And I actually had some terrible arguments with Dan Winter about this. And he was going, no, pentagram's not an atom. But in his latest book, I've actually photocopied a couple of pages and sent it to me. He shows that he's actually got pictures of different atoms producing all of the monads, the decads, the pentads, all of the different Pythagorean symbols. So those symbols are actually subatomic particles. And how did Pythagoras know that this is what a subatomic particle looks like? But if you have a look at this too, this is also a map of our universe. Pythagoras dealt with what he called the 7 planets. His personal deity, the deity for his school was Hygiena. His personal deity was Apollo, the sun, right, the point in the middle. Right? And then he had the other ones that circulate around the outside. So each of these points were representative of a point in our solar system. Right? So these were the planets, right? And then around the outside, he considered, because it goes around the outside of our Earth, was the moon.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, so
everything's like a cellular dot in the middle, and the middle's the nucleus of everything, and then it splits, divides, and multiplies, and then you get what we turn out to be.
It's
infinite,
right.
isn't it?
Yeah.
You go into the middle, you work from the inside out, not the outside in.
Well, it can go either way.
Or it can go in and out like the sea of the tide, yeah.
The fractality and the phi ratio is actually the secret to
Thank you for that.
so much.
We have to go because we have to get a train. Thank you.
Jack, just a question about your notion about Pythagoras and Tibet. I'm doing some reading, and clearly there's a relationship between Pythagoras and shamanism. In fact, in some literatures he's described as the Orphean shaman. So there's clearly, as you're right and pointed out, there's a relationship between his philosophy trying to connect shamanism and reason, and there's quite clearly a relationship in that. There's also historical evidence that he travelled the known world. I just wonder if, is it for those two reasons together you connect him with Tibet, or is there more to the story?
Yeah, no, well, yes, those two, obviously, but he also had Abaris. Abaris was his good friend, and Abaris was a Hyperborean shaman. And
I'm not sure from where, or is it the name?
Well, the thing that sort of gives him away as being Tibetan was he had a magical dart that he used to use, right? And the magical dart is the purba, which is the main instrument of the Tibetan shaman. Yeah, and he was supposed to be able to perform miracles, heal people, fly, and everything using this magical dart. And Pythagoras considered him an equal and actually said that he had learning from his people, and that's how Apollo became his deity, because Ambaras's people's god was Apollo, and that's where he first heard of Apollo. And it's very interesting that Pythagoras' name actually means the python, right? And the python is actually sacred to Apollo as well. And Apollo is actually, does appear to have been imported into Greece as a deity. Right? So, as most of their deities are, quite frankly. Yeah.
Why are the numbers 1, 4, 2, 8, 5 and 7 around?
Around the Star of David.
Yeah.
Star of David is actually used with recurring numbers to actually find the different fractions. So you can swap backwards and forwards between decimals and fractions using the Star of David, using it as a visual landscape. I know I glossed over that. It's really easy to get lost in that. But we have whole workshops on multiplication, on division. So you can do
using the pentacle?
Using those techniques and many more, where you can do them in your head faster than you can do them with a calculator. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's interesting. There's actually, I've seen this symbol in the book by Jung, where it was a book from a Tibetan temple, and the symbol was described as a magical symbol for warding away demons.
Yeah, I've seen this is often used with dakinis. I've got a couple of tankards with dakinis actually travelling inside it as well. But the Buddhists seem to confuse things just a little bit away from where the tradition of the shamans were. They're trying to incorporate it without fully grokking it, fully understanding it. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time and your efforts, and it was quite a quick tour of the whole thing. Like to see that